Okay, so welcome to all of you, and a big special welcome to Nick Rabin. Thank you so very, very much for giving up your time today, Nick. We really appreciate it. Nick is head of Insight at Pizza Hut. I'm going to actually let him do his own introduction because he will be much better than me giving a good potted history of his career. But he's going to focus mainly on how customer insight can help lead to innovation. So he's going to be sharing his screen with some slides. Obviously, if you've got any questions for him, please do put them in the chat. And well, I'm going to, without kind of further ado, I am going to hand over to Nick.
Thanks, Joe. Let me just share my screen. And just get a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Perfect, thank you. So thank you, Joe, and thanks everyone. It's great to be here this morning. So I'm going to be talking about how insight can help a business to innovate. So I'm head of insight for Pizza Hut in the UK and Europe. And in a minute, I'll kind of explain what that means, kind of that role. But just to give you a quick potted history of my career. So having done a business degree, I kind of moved straight into marketing, spent some time at Cadbury's for my first role, working on those great brands. Then I moved into the toy industry. So as a mid-20 something, being senior brand manager for Action Man was an absolute treat, as you can imagine. And I also looked after Star Wars toys. And then I moved to a company called Premier Foods, who you may not have heard of as a company, but you'll certainly have heard of many of their household names, as you can see there with the icons. And then in the last 8 years, I've been working at Pizza Hut. And Pizza Hut in the UK is kind of split into two divisions. So one is the delivery side, where you order your pizza and it comes to your door, and then you've got the restaurant side, which is the dine-in element, and that model's replicated across Europe. So I guess a bit on consumer insights and its relation to innovation, and it's I could go into a long rambling convoluted version of what it is I do, but if you boil it down, it's making sure that as a company we are doing the right things for our customers for now and the future, kind of future-proofing the business. But then the second half is doing things right. So we might identify a great piece of innovation, but if you don't deliver it in the right way, there's a good chance it may not succeed. So it's about doing the right things and doing things right. And my role is to make sure that happens, and it's in constant communication and always checking in with customers and consumers. So before I kind of get going, I want to ask you a question, because I'll be interested to see what you think. And that question is, can you think of a great piece of innovation, something that's really, as Chris said, what is a great innovation? And if you could just pop an example in the chat, and I can have a look, see what you think. I can see the chat. So Deliveroo, WhatsApp, Amazon, internet, car, iPhone, iPod, Alexa, telephone, perfect. Steam engine, brilliant. Airbnb, absolutely. Monotheism, okay. Camera, brilliant. So all absolutely amazing examples of innovation. And I've kind of captured some of these things probably in a similar vein. So I've got the wheel, a nail which holds things together, the light bulb. We went from fire to light bulb, refrigeration, TV, phones. All of these are associated with kind of game-changing inventions. But quite often when we think of innovation, we think of these huge, I suppose, life-changing, almost world-changing pieces of innovation, but they don't have to be that grand and that life-changing. And when you think of innovation, it can be many different things. It can be revolutionary. So how Tesla is revolutionizing the motor industry with electric vehicles. Evolutionary. So if you think about an iPhone, we started with the first iPhone in 2007, and every year it evolves slightly. Each year there's a little bit of innovation in there that just makes it a bit better than the previous version. So it's evolving what's already there. Disrupting, and there are other examples. So Uber completely turning the taxi industry on its head. We had the same with Airbnb in the chat. Strategic, so are you solving a strategic problem? So that's a Nintendo Wii, and Nintendo realized that gaming was really only for kind of your stereotypical young blokes in their bedroom, but actually why couldn't it be open to families and women as well? So that's where the Wii came from, which is a far more inclusive product. There's tactical, so you know, Coca-Cola is just about keeping the market interesting. They'll launch different variants, so it might be a bit small to see there, but that's cherry flavor Coke, which might appeal to a slightly different customer or consumer. Then there's game-changing innovation. So it's kind of taking something that's just wasn't there before and kind of changing the game within the market for, in this case, food delivery. Making things better. So again, back to the iPhone, we had mobile phones before, but what Apple did was take the concepts of an iPhone and made it that much better by introducing the first smartphone. And then there's reinventing. So again, doorbells have been around kind of for decades, but using technology, Ring has kind of reinvented what was there before. So innovation can, excuse me, innovation can be all sorts of things. It can be very small things and just making what's there a little bit better. It can be revolutionary. I'm going to focus on probably the strategic part of innovation, but the process I'll talk you through can apply to any of these in reality. So moving on. So I have another quick question for you, and that is all of the innovations I've talked about. So what we've put in the chat, I've just talked about. What do you think they have in common? Maybe just pop one word into the chat. It'll be interesting to see what you think. Let's have a look. Crazy ideas. Anything else? Collaboration, value add, belief, originality, pulling through, communication, right time. That's interesting. Information access outside the box, passion, keeping brand awareness top of mind, logical extension. Okay, none of those are, excuse me, got a frog in my throat. So none of those are incorrect, of course, but what I would say is all of them are solving a particular problem. Sometimes we don't know the problem is there until it's solved, but you know, everything is kind of making life better or making something better, which means it's solving a problem. And how is it doing that? It's making life or a process or a customer journey or something, it's just making it easier. Or it's making it better. It's a better version of what was there before. And probably better than that, if it's easier and better, you've got to a great solution. So all of these innovations started with, we've got a problem, let's find a solution to make it easier or better. And I'll give you some examples, starting here. So you might not see this as a problem, but making rice, right? You have to get your kind of dry rice. You have to measure out the amount you want. Think about how many people you're buying for and what's the right amount for each person. You then have to put it in the pan and think about how much water you need for the amount of rice you've got. Then you have to boil the water. You probably have to wait 20 minutes. You have to keep checking and stirring your rice. And then when it's done, hopefully you've got the perfect amount of rice cooked perfectly. But don't forget, you've got to then wash up all the things you've used. And if you've done it badly, you might, as I've done in the past, you might have burnt your pan and you have to go and buy a new pan. So that was kind of the old way of doing it. And when you think about it, you think, well, that's not particularly a problem. But is there a better way? So Uncle Ben's about 15 years ago came up with microwavable rice. So microwavable rice, if you've not used microwavable rice, you basically tear a notch in the top of the pack, put it in the microwave for 2 minutes, then you have perfectly prepared, perfectly portioned rice. So you've kind of made it easier and better because it's perfect every time. So that little innovation, you might say, well, it's not like inventing the wheel or the light bulb, but it's made the lives of those who use that product that much easier, and the product is better. And that market is now worth £250 million a year in the UK alone. Think what it might be globally. So that's a great example of solving a problem with a solution that makes things easier and better. But why do we need to innovate? I mean, you could say, well, what have all of these companies got in common? And the thing is, these companies probably failed to innovate. They probably failed to recognize that the world is continually changing, and actually something easier and better is coming along. So if I just see the tech issue. So, you know, HMV, the high street music retailer, could have gone into digital music very early. They didn't, and then Spotify came along. Yeah, Thomas Cook has been surpassed by all sorts of online travel companies. Blockbuster, another great example. They persisted with video hire until no one wanted to go out and hire videos anymore. BlackBerry didn't innovate, and the iPhone came along, and so on and so on. So all of these companies that probably rested on their laurels, were very successful in their day, weren't quick enough to innovate, and by the time they came around to it, it was too late. So what it's all about is relevance. It's about remaining relevant for your customers, consumers, and the world today. Because if you're not relevant, then the opposite is actually quite serious. You become insignificant, extraneous, unsuitable, inapplicable, etc., as these random pigeons are telling us. So we've got to remain relevant as a company, as a business, or as a brand. So that's kind of the whys, but kind of where do we start? And I'm going to talk about this. You know, I do work in a large organization, as I always have done. So we've got processes in place, we've got a lot of resource, but this is stuff that anyone can do, really, but you have to kind of take the time to go and do it. So where we start, probably on an annual basis, is a situation analysis. Where is our brand? Where is our business? And that's just looking at kind of all the information you can get hold of. So kind of 3 or 4 tools here that are super useful. One you may have heard of is called PESTLE analysis. And that's really looking at, and it's quite small, so I apologize, but that's really looking at the external environment and anything that's going to crop up that may affect your business or may mean you need to innovate to kind of stay relevant and keep up. So PESTLE stands for political, economical, social, technological, legal, and environmental. So thinking about my company, Pizza Hut, you know, take economical. Obviously, we've been through the pandemic. We've been through a bit of a downturn. There's a higher unemployment. So we've got to think about remaining very competitive on a value basis and looking at our prices. And I'll talk more about that later. Technology, I mean, technology in our market has completely transformed it. So becoming digital, internet enabled, being able to order online, and competing with the likes of Deliveroo and Just Eat is absolutely critical for us. 10 years ago, people picked up the phone to order their pizza. Nowadays, everything is on pretty much on your phone. Environmental, we've got to be very cognizant of our impact on the environment and thinking about sustainability. So super important to look at kind of everything external, and then there are trends. So what's happening in the world more generally with society, with consumers, customers, but also within your market. What are other companies doing? And I've got here, and we'll come back, just an example. So we work with a company called Euromonitor, and they look at the UK and the world and see what the big trends are that we need to be reacting to. So there's a lot on here, but I've just highlighted a few that will particularly impact our own business. So plant-based eating, sustainability, as already mentioned, digital transformation, recreating social occasions where they disappeared, and so on. So think about what those trends might be, and you can search on Google and you'll find a lot of this stuff out there. But also what is particular to your business. Competitive analysis. So we continually review what our competitors are doing. Kind of the big kind of strategic stuff, the tactical stuff, any new deals, promotions, the way they operate, the way they're advertising, etc., etc. Because what they might be doing is something you might need to catch up with. They might be doing something better than you're doing. And the way you're doing it. So actually just having a look every now and again what competitors are doing is super important. And then finally, market research. And as part of my role as head of customer insight, consumer insight, I do a lot of market research. And market research, don't think it's for big companies with huge budgets. It doesn't have to be. So again, I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But particularly on market research, I always start with, why aren't people using our business? What is stopping people from using Pizza Hut and going to Domino's or Papa John's or elsewhere? Because if you can work out what's stopping customers, or even maybe you had customers who are no longer coming to you, that's a really fantastic place to start, is actually finding the problems that we talked about earlier, and then you can go about solving them.
Before you move on, Nick, can I just quickly ask,
Sure.
the L of PESTLE, so you've got political, economic, social...
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's legal.
Legal, lovely. I thought it was.
Yeah, is it way too small? There you go.
There we are, thank you, perfect.
So yeah, legal super important as well. So again, in our industry, for example, in 2023, there'll be new laws around advertising food that's kind of high in salt, sugar, and fat. So we've got to really take that into account when we innovate going forward, because some of the products we have today, we may no longer be able to advertise on digital channels. So yeah, always kind of looking ahead at what legislation is on the way is super important. So back to market research. So you've probably all heard of market research. You may not have done any, but I mean, simply put, it's about finding the truth. I'll zoom in and out where I think it's small, but it's about finding the truth. And I thought, even if it hurts, because sometimes you don't necessarily want to hear the truth. And if there is a reason why consumers or customers aren't coming to you or they're leaving you, you've got to find out why. So it's all about that, finding out what the problems are. Going into market research itself, there's kind of two categories really. There's primary research, which you go out and do yourself, and secondary research. So primary research is focus groups, is gathering customers together in a room and having a structured conversation. Surveys, I'm sure you're very familiar with. It's about questionnaires. I'm getting about more quantitative data. In-depth interviews, it can be one-to-one. So, if you're a business where you have few customers, why not have an in-depth chat with them about what works for your business or your products or service, what's not working, and how you can improve. Observation is interesting. Is actually just observing how customers are using your product or service. Field test is more about kind of later on in the process. And then there's secondary research, which is about existing information. So do you have internal sources of information? So do you get customer feedback already? Can you go and examine that? Or other external sources? So do customers talk about you on social media? Do you have Google reviews? Are you reviewed on Trustpilot? Going and getting all that information is if you have it, it's all there, and of course it's absolutely free. Yeah, market research is actually absolutely critical in understanding what your customer thinks of you, what their needs are, and where your problems might be. And then just going back to surveys, you may have heard of SurveyMonkey. So, I was saying it doesn't have to be expensive. You can set up a SurveyMonkey account absolutely free for the basic service. If you've got a database of your customers, there's no reason why you can't create a survey, send a survey to your customers and get feedback. And as I say, it's free of charge. Or if you want to go a bit bigger than that, SurveyMonkey also have a service called Audience, where you can actually go out to a UK audience, how you define it, just for a few £100. So if you want to talk to, a representative sample of the UK population, you can send a survey to 200 people, and it will cost you about £700. But you could narrow that down in any way you want. So you could, for example, talk to young adults, 18 to 25, or just men or women, however you want. But it's actually relatively cheap to go out and ask the questions you want about whatever you want. So there's a good tip for you. There are other providers, of course, but SurveyMonkey are one of the leaders.
Somebody has just asked, which just is relevant to this, Nick, sorry to interrupt, are there any decent research forums in London that you can use?
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, it depends on the kind of research, and it might be something I can follow up on further. Market research is a massive industry, and there's hundreds of companies. But more and more, and I've actually got another recommendation later on, more and more research is becoming a bit more automated and self-served. So rather than going to an agency and briefing them, you're able to do more yourself. So I've got another recommendation coming up in a moment as to how to do that. Okay, so back to the process. So once you've got all of that information, you've kind of done your pestle analysis, your trend analysis, your research. What we are then to do, and this is, again, if you've ever studied any business studies or been to business school, you'll know what the SWOT analysis, which is basically identifying what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. That's kind of all about you as a company. And then the bottom half is anything that's external. So what are the opportunities out there, but what are the threats coming down the line? And here's, I won't show you the detail, but it's not long and complicated. It should be obvious once you've done that work around what goes into each of these areas. So this is the Pizza Hut delivery SWOT that we did earlier this year. And that really starts to boil down where your opportunities may lie. What comes next is really distilling what do we think out of that SWOT, what's actually really important, what are those critical business issues, what are those really super important problems we have to solve. So one example we have here is we've written a part of our SWOT, but as more of a business issue, so kind of brought it to life. So business issue here being, Pizza Hut is associated with indulgent food. That's considered a treat, but there's increasing pressure from consumers, NGOs, charities, and the government to encourage healthy eating. So what we do then is turn that into a disruptive question, and a disruptive question is kind of what leads to our innovation briefs. So it's kind of taking what's the problem into a bit more of a positive spin. So the way we've articulated it is, how do we offer better for you menu items, still feel like an indulgent treat and deliver on taste? And that effectively is the innovation brief that went to our new product development teams. So from that point, you take the innovation brief, and there's kind of two routes we can go. If it's a simple problem, we might go straight to idea generation. How can we generate lots of ideas that will directly solve the problem? But quite often, if it's a complex problem, we might go into more exploratory research to understand the problem further. So it's about going back to that the market research model that I showed you earlier, and making sure you talk to the right people. So, in this case, we talk to consumers who might reject Pizza Hut because actually they do think we're too indulgent, or our products are unhealthy, or people who are looking for more of a healthier lifestyle. So we'll go with them, maybe with some hypotheses around what the solution is, but really understand what it is they would want from a healthier pizza in this case, or healthier takeaway, and really explore that with them in a bit of depth. And once you've got that kind of extra information, that extra intelligence, then you can go into kind of generating your ideas to solve the problem. A bit about idea generation itself, and this, we could probably do another whole session on this because it's a skill in its own right. And maybe next time I could do an idea generation session, but this is about kind of taking time out from your day, maybe gathering some colleagues, some people, anyone who you think is a bit more creative and might help solve the problem, gaining inspiration from other areas. So kind of getting all of that information around kind of your competitors and maybe adjacent markets and other categories, and see what other people are doing to help kind of inspire you to solve the problem. And then have lots and lots of ideas. And once you've got those ideas, it's about, well, how do we know which is the right idea? So, and I realize I'm moving through this super quickly, and this is quite a long process, but this is kind of how we approach it. So we'll take a vote. So let's say we've got 30 ideas. We'll kind of vote on which ones feel quite credible and sensible. But then the next stage is kind of making sure you have some criteria for filtering your ideas. So, is the idea credible for your business? It may be a great idea, but does it feel right for your brand or your company? Do you have the capability as a company or a business to actually launch this idea? How much investment will be needed? Would we have to create, I don't know, open a new factory, or would we have to create a new web platform? How much, again, is that investment realistic? But also, size of the prize, how big do we think this idea could be realistically? And then finally, is it solving the problems? You kind of have to go right back to the beginning, say, it's a great idea, but will this solve the problem? What we would then do next is kind of take the top ideas, and we do what we call screening. So it's concept screening. We'll kind of write up the idea in a bit more detail. And again, we'll go and do a bit more research with customers and ask them, is this something you would buy? Is it appealing? Is it relevant to you? So the other company that I was referring to is here, called Zappi. Zappi, firstly, they're an amazing example of innovation in the market research industry, because what they've done is they've allowed people like me to automate market research. So whereas before I'd go to a research agency, I'd brief them, they'd come back with a proposal and they'd say, yeah, it's going to cost £15,000 and in 4 weeks' time, you'll get your answer. With Zappi, I can upload my ideas, select my audience, whoever they are, the size. I can then press go, and then within 3 or 4 hours, I'll have a fully completed piece of research with an automated report at a cost of about £1,500 to £2,000. So they've taken a process that used to take 4 weeks down to 4 hours, and used to cost £15,000 to about £2,000. An amazing example. But if you do want to kind of test ideas, Zappi are absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend them. So moving on, so now it's time to design. So let's say you've been through this process, you've got an idea, maybe two ideas that that consumers love, you think it's right for your business, it's feasible for your business. Then it's about actually designing all the intricate detail of that idea, because at the moment it's just a concept. So we have what we call a proposition wheel. So in the kind of food and pizza world, you know, what size is the pizza going to be? What shape? What flavors should we launch? How many in the range? Is it 1, 3, 5? How do we present it? So what's the packaging like? What do we call it? How do we price it? Is it premium? Is it mainstream? How do we talk about it? You know, in the way we describe it or position it. And this is super important, because if you might have a great idea and you might go to the effort of launching something to the market, but you could get one of these things wrong and it could actually end in failure. So, you know, for example, for us, we know naming is really important. So if we put a product on our menu and consumers or customers don't understand it because the name is a bit obscure, they might not look at it, they might not read the detail behind it, and they'll move on to something else. So it might seem, you know, slightly unimportant or insignificant, but each one of these, I suppose, criteria or elements of the proposition is super important that you get that right. So again, like before, if it's a complex idea, we will go into a further research with tends to be qualitative research, so more focused groups or in-depth interviews, to make sure that we do get all of these elements of the proposition correct. If it's a bit more simple or tactical, we'll take that concept and we'll kind of write that up ourselves. But you know, I kind of have this philosophy that is very difficult to second guess what customers actually want. And I kind of say this all the time to my colleagues, is what we think they think is probably wrong, because we have our own biases. So, you know, when we talk about what flavors should we have for a new pizza, tends to be the flavors you like, not necessarily what all your customers are like. So that's a really good philosophy to think. Just because you think it's right doesn't mean your customers think it's right. So please do take that into account. And then you've got your final proposition. So we've gone through that process. We've really kind of refined an idea. And then it's about taking it to market. So again, there's two routes you can go. If it's a low cost, simple, tactical idea, you can take that idea and then kind of take it straight to market and go to launch. If it's a bit more complicated or there's a lot of investment involved, we'll often test market a product and try it out. So for us in Pizza Hut, it might be that we just test something in 5 stores, for example. Or if it's testing something, a new initiative on our website, we can kind of isolate customers in certain stores that only certain customers can see that innovation, and we can see if it's being adopted or not. And again, if there's something that's a bit of high investment or a bit of a risk for your company, we talk about an MVP, a minimum viable product. And what that is kind of what's the least you can do at the least cost to get your product or service to a market, to kind of to test it in the market and make sure that what you've launched is right, because it means you're not kind of going all the way to the final vision of your product. You're getting something out there that that customers can try, and then you can get feedback and kind of course correct. So if something's not quite right, but if it is working, then you can have a phase 2. So how can we build on this proposition and then keep innovating as time goes on. So yeah, for something that's a bit more high cost or strategic, it's really important to test it out before going to full launch. and then launch. So just going back to my example of the business issue we have around indulgent foods, and Pizza Hut in particular being thought of as indulgent and a bit unhealthy. So our question was, how do we offer better for you menu items still feel like an indulgent treat that deliver on taste? And we went through that entire process and we had lots of ideas. One was a cauliflower pizza base, and we researched that, and that sounds interesting because it replaces all the dough and the bread and the carbs. The issue is, when we did our research, only about 3% of our customers would actually buy it. So it's a great example of, yeah, we think that's a really good idea, but actually it wouldn't be commercially viable for us. But what the actual solution was, and this launched in January, was to launch our flatbread pizzas. Here's the proposition. So Pizza Hut delivers flatbread pizzas. Take a hand-stretched, individual-sized pizza and load it with a choice of 4 uniquely tasty recipes. Best part, each flatbread has been carefully created with mouth-wateringly delicious, to be mouth-wateringly delicious, whilst coming in at under 650 calories. So you can indulge in Pizza Hut flavors and know and love and feel good about it too. So this, going back to that proposition wheel, we kind of ticked every box. Firstly, we'll come to price in a minute, but firstly, we knew that being super tasty was important to us, and having really tasty flavors is important. The under 650 calories is directly solving that kind of less healthy issue. Naming it flatbread pizzas was very important, because actually it sounds quite foodie, calling it flatbread, and it's a known concept. We looked at things like 650 calorie pizza, which sounds a bit bland and boring, and actually a diet product, where actually this isn't, it's just a better for you product. So we kind of made sure everything in that proposition wheel was spot on. In reality, when we launched this in January, this has been one of our most successful innovations we've had in many, many years. So again, it's not going to change the world particularly, but for those people who are getting pizza delivery, who want something a bit healthier, then this absolutely solves the problem with a perfect solution. But it's not just about, for us, physical innovations, it's all sorts of things. So one problem we had is retaining customers. And I think, like any business, kind of getting loyalty is super important. So about 3 years ago, I worked on our loyalty scheme. And again, that kind of philosophy of not knowing what customers want is super important, because we went into a piece of research exploring the world of loyalty. So we talked to customers about what other loyalty schemes they use and what works for them and what doesn't. And if Pizza Hut were to do a loyalty scheme, what would you want? What would you want money off, coupons, or would you want, I don't know, merchandise? And actually they said, no, we just want more free food. People love free food. So actually exploring the solution as well as the problem was super important. And we launched, as I said, our Hut Rewards scheme 3 years ago for Pizza Hut delivery. And there are now 3.5 million people signed up to it. So it's massively successful for us. Value is another example. When we spoke to customers, they always said that your pizzas are too expensive. We look at your prices and we get put off, even though you have deals that, you charge, 17, 18, 19 pounds for a pizza. So coming out of that, we created our £5 favorites menu, which means it kind of makes it really accessible to a much wider audience. So they're kind of the medium pizzas rather than large, and each one only has 1 or 2 toppings, which means it's commercially viable for us. But as a way of drawing customers in with great value, it's been fantastic for us. And what we find is they'll see that, they'll come to us, and they'll spend more in any case. And then kind of on the online retail side, we also heard from customers that, I don't know if you've got your, when you've looked at pizza delivery leaflet or on the website, there's thousands, well, not thousands, but there's so many different kinds of deals, and you can never work out what's the best deal for me and my family and my situation. So we invented something called the deal bot, sorry, and the deal bot basically removes the need to go and find a deal. It basically says, you order exactly what you want and we'll apply a discount at the end. So, you know, another great example of a customer problem getting super confused about all the deals we have, and just basically taking the problem away from them with this little, this neat innovation. So that's kind of coming towards the end. So what can you take away with this, from this? So firstly is do your situation analysis. It's like, before you start innovating, before you think, what do we need to do to innovate? Just think about the situation, the competitor analysis, the trend analysis, the pest analysis, and do your SWOT. And then as an important part of that is talk to your customers, talk to your consumers, whether it's primary research, you send out a survey or do focus groups, or you go to existing data internally. You know, without talking to your customers, you can't really know what their problems are. But then define your problems, and we define them as business issues, as you saw with the health one. Turn those business issues into a disruptive question, because that disruptive question is effectively your innovation brief. It turns around a problem into starting to find a solution. Have loads and loads of ideas, get people together, have a brainstorm together. But when you filter them, make sure they're on set criteria. So again, is it solving the problem? Is it credible for our business? What's the investment, etc. And if you need to research with customers or consumers, go do that. And then create your own proposition wheel. So you saw what's important for us in pizza, but you need to think about what's important in your kind of product or service, and making sure that you get all of those elements right when you design your final solution. And again, if you can, research your solution with customers. And then finally, test and learn. So if it is a big innovation, if it's something a bit more complex, you know, try it out on a single customer, maybe get them to try it for free, so they can test it for you. Use an MVP, so minimal viable product, so you're not investing huge amounts up front. Get customer feedback, and then course correct. So if you need to adjust the innovation, then do so before going to launch. So kind of final thoughts. You know, my role is about do the right thing for the business and then doing things right. And that's a great philosophy for innovation. Don't just do innovation for the sake of it. Just think about what problem you're solving. And all of this is to make you relevant for your customers or future customers. And if you remain relevant, you'll retain your existing customers. And ultimately, it's about solving that problem, making life easier for your customers or consumers, and making things better. So I think that's about it from me. So thanks for listening, and I guess there may be some further questions.
There are.
Yeah.
Do you want to go off stop share? Thank you so much. That was really fascinating. I've certainly learned a lot, and I hope some other people here have as well. One question for the audience: how do you cater? This is from David Greenberg. How do you cater for the ICO? I don't know what ICO is. GDPR with providers like SurveyMonkey for market research.
So yeah, that's fine. In most times with market research, customers are completely anonymous. So GDPR is not an issue. If you then go and collect like email addresses, etc., that's when GDPR comes into it. And I have to say, I'm not an expert, but if you were to use SurveyMonkey audiences, you never know. You know the profile of the person answering the survey, but you don't know who that person is. So GDPR is not necessarily an issue. When it's your own customers, I guess if they've already signed up to receive marketing information, then you're at liberty to send them a survey. If they haven't, then you might be on slightly dodgier ground. So if you do have a database, make sure they are signed up to receive kind of communication from yourself.
One of my favorite ever quotes was from Henry Ford, who said that if he had asked customers, they would have asked for faster horses. Can some insight or some research lead to bad decisions?
Can insight or research lead to bad decisions? I mean, in my experience, I would say no. I mean, in that case, it's almost like taking existing technology. So the technology was kind of there through kind of railways, etc. And it's taking that technology and how you can apply it to a different use. So, in this digital age, that is happening all the time. So I wouldn't say insight necessarily leads you to bad decisions, but I suppose that's a more visionary kind of approach to innovation. And I mean, Steve Jobs used to say something similar. Actually, a lot of customers don't know what they want until you give it to them. And you could say that for the rice solution. People would have said, well, actually, it's absolutely fine to take 20 minutes to make rice. But until you've got the solutions that show there is a better way, then I think, it's absolutely valid to kind of be a bit more visionary and yeah. So yeah, I'm not sure I would agree with that. Yeah.
Nick, I'm just very aware of the time.
Sure.
Thank you so very, very, very much for your really fascinating insight into kind of market research. It really was brilliant, and I've certainly taken a lot of pointers away that I might be sharing with some of the clients that I'm dealing with. So really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And you did it in such a kind of easy to understand way. We have had one question about the slides. So if it would be possible to be able to share the slides with everybody later, that would be great. But understand.
Sure, I'll convert them to PowerPoint.
Lovely. Thank you so much. All right, everybody. Sorry, Nick. Carry on.
No, I was going to say, if anyone kind of wants to link in with me and ask further questions, feel free to do so.
Fabulous. We will look forward to seeing you all in 10 minutes on the Ask the Experts session. So thank you very, very much, and have a good morning, Nick. Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.